I would just like to give you a trigger warning that this episode talks about suicide. So if you need to, this episode might be one to skip for you. Hi, and welcome to episode 10 of the Monday Night Review. Today we're not talking about a person or a specific crime, but we're going to talk about a place, possibly one of the most notorious hotels in the world, the inspiration for Barton Fink and season 5 of American Horror Story. It's also appeared in numerous music videos. This week we're going to be talking about the Cecil Hotel. For those Brits among us, it's spelled Cecil Hotel. If you don't know anything about it, you may be wondering what we're doing talking about it, but you're going to find out. So it was built in 1924, 19 floors, 700 rooms, and it's a huge E-shaped hotel, and it cost 1.5 million to build, which is 23 million in today's money. And it's got this magnificent marble lobby, and it's a real, if you imagine like 1920s American architecture, it really looks like the epitome of what you'd expect a 1920s hotel to be. It was originally designed for businessmen and travellers who wanted to be near the bustle of and the restaurants and theatres of Main Street in LA. It took 3 years to build and was finally opened in 1927, and it looked like just this incredible hotel. But 2 years later, the Great Depression started, and it became more of a budget option for transient workers. It managed to flourish like this throughout the 40s, but as the surrounding neighbourhood became less desirable, eventually attracting the infamous name of Skid Row, which you may well have heard of, the popularity of the hotel declined along with its reputation. Prices crashed, and then the clientele became a mix of like semi-permanent no-hopers, itinerant criminals, people wanting to rent rooms by the hour. There were hundreds of single-room occupants who lived for years at a time in shabby rooms with shared bathrooms. Guests kept themselves to themselves. And as time went on, the Cecil was just overshadowed by newer, better hotels in better areas. What had been a great area near Main Street then just basically became Skid Row. So Skid Row is officially Central City East, but I've never heard of Central City East. I've just heard of Skid Row. It remains one of the poorest areas in LA to this day, and it houses the biggest stable population of homeless people in the USA. It covers about 60 blocks, 2 square miles, to the east of downtown LA. In the 1900s, residential hotels started appearing around that area to house seasonal labourers, and by the 1930s, it was home to as many as 10,000 homeless, alcoholics, and others on the margins of society. In 1947, there was a blockade raid with 345 arrests, and the chief of police declaring that at least 50% of the crime in LA came from those living on Skid Row. During the 1950s, it was a place for the homeless, alcoholics, and addicts to meet and sleep. So that means that there was about 10,000 homeless and transients within 4-kilometre radius of the Cecil Hotel. In the 1970s, it was a containment zone where all the shelters and services and everything geared towards homelessness and drug dependency was situated. And it was also in the 70s that it was discovered that hospitals and mental institutions began dumping patients there who couldn't afford to pay for their medical fees. So what used to happen with the Cecil Hotel is that people who were down there, like people who were homeless or unemployed, would be able to either live there permanently at a low cost, or they would be able to live there when they had a job. And then when they ran out of money, they'd go and live on Skid Row. And then if they made a bit of money, they'd go back to the Cecil. In 2007, part of the hotel was refurbished and rebranded Stay on Main. But certain rooms of the Cecil legally had to remain as residential and low-income rooms. So though Stay on Main was new and geared towards tourists and had a different entrance, and was like a nice, affordable place to stay for tourists. What people didn't know is that they're basically staying at the Cecil Hotel, which is in a really dangerous area of LA and has quite the reputation that we're about to find out about. They shared the Stay on Main and the Cecil Hotels shared the same lifts, so anyone staying at the Cecil could get out on the Stay on Main floors, and vice versa. So Stay on Main had floors 4 to 6 of of the 14 floors at the hotel, and anything higher than the 7th floor was deemed extremely dangerous by long-term residents, with an average of between 1 to 3 911 calls a day. So this split of the hotels caused its own problems, which we're going to go into later. The hotel changed hands in 2017 and was closed for refurbishment, which stalled due to the global pandemic. But why are we talking about a hotel in a podcast that's about true crime, paranormal, and weird stuff? Well, the Cecil Hotel has a history of horrible things happening throughout history. One of them, the disappearance of Elisa Lam, you may be familiar with. It's like a true crime favourite because it's so weird, and B, because it's really recent, and it's a story where we've got modern technology. So we're going to go into that in a bit. Its short-term rental and residential status made it a hotspot for sex workers, drug addicts and dealers, adultery, and those wanting to hide from the law. The hotel opened at the end of 1926, and on January the 2nd, 1927, is the first recorded suicide of the hotel, when Percy Cook, who's 52, shot himself in the head. In 1934, Louis D. Border slit his own throat, with more suicides occurring throughout the 40s and 50s. At least 13 recorded, and long-term residents started to refer to the hotel as the suicide. In 1938, a marine fireman named Roy Thompson, who had been at the Cecil for several weeks, was found dead on the skylight of the building next door after apparently jumping from his hotel room. These strange deaths weren't just at the hotel. Long-term Cecil residents were attempting suicides in the lobby of other hotels. A would-be armed robber was arrested there. In 1944, 19-year-old Dorothy Jean Purcell, who was staying at the hotel with her boyfriend, woke up to stomach cramps. Not knowing she was pregnant, she ended up giving birth on the bathroom floor. She gave birth to what she believed was a stillborn baby, and not wanting to wake up her 38-year-old boyfriend or tell him about the baby, she instead threw the newborn out of the window. Police found the infant's lifeless body on the roof adjacent to the building. Even more disturbing was that the autopsy of the baby boy revealed he had air in his lungs at the time of his death, so he wasn't dead when she threw him out of the window. She was charged with murder but was found not guilty by reason of insanity, and 3 independent criminal psychiatrists testified that she was just mentally confused. She never gave any other reason as to why she'd done what she'd done, except stating that she thought the baby was stillborn. At least 4 women have jumped to their deaths from the hotel, 3 from windows, 1 from the roof. In 1962, Pauline Otten jumped from her 7th-story window after a fight with her husband, and she landed on a pedestrian. Both were killed instantly. Later that year, 50-year-old Julia Frances Moore leapt from the 8th floor, landing on the 2nd-story railing. In 1964, long-term resident who was popular and well-known in the hotel, she was called Pigeon because she used to go and feed the pigeons in the square. She was found raped, stabbed and beaten in her room, and someone was arrested but later released, and no one was found guilty of her murder. It remains unsolved, and she was such a popular figure, it really shocked people. More famously, Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker, was a frequent visitor to Skid Row and apparently stayed at the Cecil for a few weeks on and off for most of 1980 and 1981. He apparently used to walk into the hotel in blood-stained underwear and walk barefoot up to his $14 a night room on the top floor. And residents who saw him just assumed he worked in an abattoir. They only put 2 and 2 together when they saw his mugshot all over the city, we should probably cover Richard Ramirez at some point. He's one of the few people that gives me nightmares. But he was caught because he was recognised from having his mugshot everywhere. Not far from the Cecil Hotels, where he got off the bus and was basically chased by an angry mob. Police believed he probably dumped his weapons and blood-stained clothes in the industrial-sized bins at the back of the hotel. Ugh, absolutely horrible to think about. He's a really, really creepy man. I will post a picture of him to go with this episode so you can have a look, but I find him absolutely horrifying, and the thought of being in a lift with him. He's the kind of guy, which is why the Stay on Main thing is so dodgy. Obviously, Stay on Main was later than the 80s, but the thought of getting in your lift at your hotel and Richard Ramirez getting in with you is fairly horrendous. In 1988, a man accused of killing his girlfriend in Huntington Beach was arrested at the Cecil, and in 1991, Austrian serial killer Jack Unterweger, can't say it, stayed there, possibly in an attempt to mirror the crimes of Ramirez. While he was there, he strangled and killed at least 3 sex workers. 4 years later, murder suspect Eric Reed was found at the hotel after breaking out of jail. In 2013, the Cecil Hotel was back in the media when Canadian student Elisa Lam seemingly disappeared into thin air. There was footage of her behaving really strangely in a lift, which was released. It's a 5-minute video. You can watch it and make your own mind up as to what's going on. The 21-year-old Canadian student was spending a week at the Stay on Main, which was the budget part of the travel student-y hostel part of the hotel. 2 weeks later, residents complained of low water pressure and foul-tasting greyish-brown water, and the naked body of Lam was found in one of the rooftop water tanks. How she got there is still unknown and subject to a lot of debate, and a fairly terrible recent 4-part Netflix documentary. For what it's worth, I think she stopped taking her meds and had an episode. Absolutely no question. People are like, but she'd have to move a ladder and climb up it. And I'm like, yeah, if you're having a mental episode caused by being off your medication and you're on a mission to do something, you can move a ladder. So it's hard to tell which stories about the hotel are real, which are embellishments, and which are just fiction. For example, many believe that Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia, stayed there or spent her last night drinking at the hotel bar, but that's been proven to be wrong. But if you do any research on the Cecil Hotel, that story is still all over the internet as being true. And I know it makes it spookier, doesn't it, to have the Black Dahlia drinking there. But in 2017, it was designated a historic cultural monument, and the Cecil Hotel was due to reopen later in 2021 with refurbished rooms, residential units, and a pool on the roof where Elisa Lam's body was found. But no work's being carried out, and the current owner says all plans are on hold with no current timeline. To those who watch the Netflix documentary and want to do a little true crime tourism, not me, they'll have to hold their wad a little bit longer. Many believe that the Cecil Hotel is haunted. Some think that evil just seeps from its walls. There have been at least 2 film crews with ghost hunters there in the past 2 years, which you can watch on YouTube. If you're into that sort of thing, which I totally am. But to be fair, I'm not sure a deserted hotel with so much history and worldwide infamy would feel anything but incredibly creepy in the middle of the night. So it could be, for me, I think possibly it's the demographic of its tenants and clients, and versus the upkeep of such a vast hotel in a competitive market, meaning that people who wanted to be undisturbed and get up to bad things could afford a room there, and they knew that they were going to be undisturbed. And so, the hotel's getting shabbier and shabbier. They're not making enough money to keep it looking nice. So you're going to make less money. The reputation's going to go down. And I think, all you need is one serial killer staying upstairs, and that's going to pretty much make most people not want to visit. And if you want to buy drugs and get high, what better way to do it than a cheap room in a hotel, the same place that your dealer lives and your other addicts who you want to hang out and get high with. So that's the very brief history of the Cecil Hotel in LA. It's annoying because I'm sort of slightly fascinated by this building. It's almost like the LA version of the hotel in The Shining, but because of this documentary that they put on in earlier this year, anything on the internet is basically all about the documentary and less about the history of it and the stuff that was going on. And the same goes for the Elisa Lam story. It's kind of taken over everything else about the hotel, which is it's an incredibly sad and upsetting story. And I don't know how her family must feel, because it's just, there's so much footage of her in the hotel and speculation about what happened and her mental health and her lifestyle. I'm not sure how I'd feel about that if it was my child, but I guess you want answers, and it's a very shocking and unusual way to lose a family member, but it does completely dominate the internet when you're looking up anything about the Cecil Hotel. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. I'd love you to email me your favourite true crime, paranormal, historical story. The email is themondaynightrevue@gmail.com, and that's review spelled REVUE. You can come over and support us on Patreon, get a little bit of extra content. And until then, stay safe, be kind, and always check the back seat before you drive.